Divorce papers had been duly filed, and when it came to dividing the property, I made the decision to claim the house. Despite my insistence, Ben dismissed any notion that he could contest it. Uttering those final words, he abruptly left the hospital room, indifferent to my pleas for him to wait and my desire for a meaningful conversation. That was how I found myself discarded, even in the midst of battling a serious illness like cancer. Loneliness enveloped me, but strangely, the negative emotions that once lingered in my heart began to dissipate. It was as if my love for Ben had evaporated. At that moment, I acknowledged that Ben, who had insulted me and consistently acted selfishly, deserved some form of retribution. I began calmly strategizing my revenge. My name is Wendy Morgan, a 50-year-old housewife living with my husband Ben. Our marriage, devoid of children, had spanned 30 years. Initially, I believed we were a supportive couple, but an irreparable rift had developed between us. In my understanding of marriage, partners should support, challenge, and complement each other. However, this was absent in our relationship. Returning from an errand, I found Ben demanding dinner immediately, oblivious to the continuous responsibilities of a housewife. Even on his days off, he prioritized his own leisure over supporting me. Over the years, Ben never extended a helping hand, regardless of how busy or unwell I was. His perception of a housewife's role seemed limited to constant labor, and he never allowed me to rest, even during illness. I had hoped for a marriage built on mutual support, but Ben's actions contradicted that ideal. The early days saw me attempting to bridge the gap, but Ben remained resolute, asserting his belief that as a housewife, I had no grounds to complain. Love had long faded, and I didn't anticipate unwavering support in everything. Still, I longed for simple kindness during challenging days. Ben's refusal to acknowledge my humanity and hardships widened the rift between us, turning our marriage joyless and meaningless. I grasped the situation more acutely than anyone else. It was during this realization that I sensed something awry with my health. While I had always been prone to illness, this time felt distinctly different. I promptly reached out to my father, who escorted me to the hospital, where I received the diagnosis of cancer. Fortunately, it was detected early, and the doctor assured me that I could commence treatment immediately. Eager to begin the healing process, I implored my father to bring only the essentials from home. Hastily, I navigated through the hospital admission procedures. Unable to meet Ben that day due to his work commitments, I conveyed the disquieting news to him through a brief message. I informed him, "Cancer has been found, and I'm being hospitalized for treatment immediately." In these moments of anxiety about the uncertain future, Ben's image crept into my thoughts. Despite my belief that my love for him had waned, a latent desire to face him properly and continue our life together as a couple lingered deep within my heart. Even though Ben had consistently been aloof and indifferent, I envisioned a scenario where, now that I was weakened, he might express concern and ask, "Are you okay?" I yearned for some warm words and would have been content with just one visit. I wondered if he struggled with meals and household chores in my absence. I felt remorse for not being able to fulfill the household duties I had always taken for granted. However, as days passed in the hospital, Ben never visited. He had read my message, and yet there was no expression of concern, not even a simple reply acknowledging the situation. His apparent indifference despite my serious illness shook me to the core, causing profound pain. Realizing the futility of my expectations, I decided to stop anticipating anything from Ben. With this newfound mindset, I faced the grueling battle against the illness. The treatment was as demanding as expected, marked by enduring pain and suffering. The medication's side effects took a toll on my body, leading to many sleepless nights filled with discomfort. There were moments when I contemplated giving up on treatment, allowing my deteriorating body to take its course and end my life. However, each time I felt this way, the encouraging words from my parents, reassuring me that I was doing great and things would surely get better, compelled me to summon strength and endure until today. Then, on a day when I was particularly unwell, lying in bed and staring blankly at the ceiling. The door to my room unexpectedly swung open. It wasn't the day for my parents to visit, and I couldn't help but wonder who had entered. The identity of the visitor became clear as I shifted my gaze and saw Ben standing there. Had he finally come to visit me, genuinely concerned about my condition? As he looked at my emaciated face with hollow cheeks, a whirlwind of emotions left me speechless. Would he come to dislike me even more? Without displaying any concern for my state, Ben sat on a chair next to the bed, stared at me, and laughed. So this is how bad one can look with cancer, huh? You don't even look like a woman anymore. His words made me feel as if the blood had drained from my face. These were words that should never be said to someone fighting cancer. I didn't want him to say anything more, but unaware of my feelings, Ben continued with even more hurtful words. Ever since you've been hospitalized and not at home, every day has been like heaven. The house is a mess, but I don't even have to go back there. Life is so comfortable without you. His heartless words reopened my wounds. Why must I be subjected to such cruel words? Why is there not a single word of concern from him? Although I wanted to vehemently criticize Ben, my weakened body couldn't move as I wished, and all I could do was silently accept his brutal words. I looked at Ben with a vacant gaze, and noticing my stare, he laughed condescendingly. Then, suddenly saying, "Oh yeah, by the way," he uttered unbelievable words. "Oh yeah, by the way, I've already filed the divorce papers. I'll be taking the house. As for the property division, you hardly have any right to refuse." The moment I heard those words, my vision blurred and twisted. Did he file the divorce papers without even consulting me? Why? As I was at a loss for words, Ben continued to speak. "I've really fallen for someone. She's 20 years younger, but I'm serious about her. I plan to be with her, so you're in the way." The realization that he was having an affair raced through my mind. However, then, having said what he wanted to, began preparing to leave. Wait a minute. Even as I said that, Ben paid no attention. There was clearly no love left for me in his heart. The realization was so painful that it didn't matter anymore. "I see. Understood." I said this, and Ben left the hospital room with a pleased laugh. After that, I endured my treatment with even more determination than before. Despite the hardships, I focused my will, resolved to completely cure my cancer and regain my health. 2 days passed like this. It might sound short, but for me, unable to sleep properly at night, those 2 days felt very long. I wondered if the divorce Ben mentioned really happened, or if he had said it just to unnerve me. The uncertainty was unbearable, but somehow I managed to continue my treatment. In fact, I had a trump card to completely bring down Ben. Even Ben, who seemed almost inhuman, would be thrown into chaos once he realized it. If panicked, he would surely try to contact me in some way. While waiting with this thought, Ben's call came in. Thinking it improper to answer in the hospital room, I pretended not to notice. But Ben persistently kept calling, even on silent mode. The continuous calls were too annoying. "I'm in the hospital room, and it's inconvenient to have my phone ringing, so please don't call." After sending this message, the calls finally stopped. But then came texts like, "Please let me talk to you just once. Please, I was wrong about everything. I'll apologize properly." Apparently, he had resorted to messaging since I wasn't answering his calls. All of his words seemed like self-defense. Probably, Ben realized why I accepted the divorce so easily. "Can I come over there now?" Faced with my silence, Ben seemed to have reached his limit and sent that message. Honestly, facing Ben now amidst my grueling battle with illness felt like nothing but pain. But if I refused, he would probably keep calling. So I replied, "Do as you like." My revenge was about to begin. Ben, who had unjustly treated me for so long and divorced without consent, deserved a severe punishment that would make him despise his life. I had been eagerly anticipating the moment when I could bring him down to the depths of despair. "Hey, what the hell is this all about?" Ben entered the room with a shout, his tone suggesting a palpable sense of panic. To an outsider, it might seem like he was overreacting, but given the circumstances, it was natural for Ben to be agitated. After all, I had been concealing an incredibly important secret, and the critical moment had arrived. I had no idea that you had assets worth $10 million. Why didn't you tell me how much you had? Ben spoke, placing my passbook on the desk, clearly displaying a deposit of over $10 million. I never mentioned it because you never asked. How could I imagine a housewife like you having so much money? If I knew you had this much, I wouldn't have divorced. That's not my problem. It's Ben's fault for divorcing me without proper confirmation. Stop with the pointless excuses. Despite his domineering behavior and divorcing me without my consent, Ben couldn't stop his selfish remarks upon discovering my assets. Why didn't you tell me? I wouldn't have divorced you if I knew. I decided to reveal the truth to the selfish Ben. The truth is, I accumulated this fortune of over $10 million through investments. I started to fill my spare time, and it was my parents who suggested, "Why don't you try investing?" Our family life was comfortable even on Ben's salary alone, but I wanted to contribute to our finances in some way. My father, knowledgeable about investments, immediately taught me diligently when I expressed interest. Thanks to his guidance, I started with the hope of making even a small profit and continued investing steadily. I made my first investment 5 years ago, and since then, I rapidly improved, becoming capable of earning significant amounts of money through investments. Even my father was astonished, saying, "I never expected you to grow this much." The profits I generated over these 5 years are the $10 million recorded in the passbook Ben brought. Actually, I was planning to tell you when the timing was right, but then I got cancer. You divorced me without listening to anything I had to say. I never intended to keep this wealth a secret forever. Once I overcame my battle with cancer and could return to my normal life, I planned to tell Ben about this $10 million. I had originally intended to share it with him, envisioning that we could continue our life as a couple and use it when necessary. However, Ben selfishly chose to divorce before I could reveal this financial secret. Now that we're strangers, it feels odd to disclose it to him. Given this outcome, the entire $10 million probably belongs to me. As I recounted my story, Ben's face flushed, and he began shouting, "If I knew you had this much money, I wouldn't have divorced you. It's your fault for keeping it a secret, so pay me $10 million in the property division. You need to atone for the sin of keeping secrets from your husband." Whether he was panicking over the reality of such a vast fortune or frustrated that he couldn't get his hands on it, Ben started saying the unthinkable. Since we were already divorced, no matter what, it was impossible to give him this $10 million. Still, Ben, seeing but unable to reach the $1 million right before him, started making unrealistic demands. In response, I unintentionally laughed, then yelled at me. "What are you laughing at? Stop belittling me. I've always been annoyed by your attitude. I never thought you'd be so cunning to have such a fortune as a wife. A wife's assets belong to her husband. You have to give me this $10 million. I never intended to keep this secret forever. I was planning to tell you. But you divorced me first. Stop making excuses. It's all your fault for keeping secrets." Without any recollection of making excuses, Ben became more enraged with each word I spoke, blaming and berating me. His shouting was too much for my head, still recovering from illness, and I couldn't bear it. Realizing it was futile to continue talking with Ben, who wouldn't accept my words and would surely try to make me the villain, I quickly ended it. "Enough is enough. You divorced me of your own accord, right? Who filed the divorce papers without my consent? I always thought your behavior was terrible, but I never imagined you could be so cruel. To think a person could feel this much frustration." Now my heart was filled not with the pain of battling cancer, but with resentment towards Ben. He should have realized that shouting this loudly would affect my weakened body. More than that, I couldn't suppress my anger towards this selfish person who sat arrogantly beside my bed, accusing me with words born from his self-centered thoughts. Do you know what I thought when I found out I had cancer? I thought that answering him might make Ben worry about me a little, be kinder to me, and reconsider his feelings. Instead, he didn't even come to visit me in the hospital. When he finally showed up, he told me he had filed for divorce without my consent and that he would take the house. How could he be so selfish and then come here criticizing me for having substantial assets? I've said it many times, I never intended to keep it a secret forever. I was planning to find the right time to tell you. You destroyed that chance with your own hands. I had never blamed Ben this much before. I had always forgiven his selfish behavior, thinking we were a couple who should support each other. I never scolded or reprimanded him, always enduring for his sake. But the reason I could endure and keep going was that I had love for Ben. I truly loved him. But now, I don't have any love left for him. All I feel is uncontrollable anger and disbelief towards Ben, who only speaks selfishly. How can someone be so self-centered? What kind of upbringing leads to such a lack of empathy? After all, a person who indulges in an affair and divorces without consent can't possibly have serious thoughts. I was too stunned to speak, realizing it was futile to harbor any doubts. Please, my girlfriend found out you have $10 million and says she'll divorce me if I don't get it from you. If I don't get this money, I'll be all alone. You still love me, right? Don't you want to help the person you love? So Ben's mistress also knows about my $10 million fortune. He must have carelessly told her. From Ben's story, it seems his mistress is also quite obsessed with money. Birds of a feather flock together, I guess. As much as Ben and his mistress seem to be a match, I couldn't care less about him. No matter how much suffering comes his way, it has nothing to do with me anymore. Please, I'll do anything. Just give me the $10 million, otherwise I'll suffer. Please help me. I had never seen Ben so desperate, and his expression seemed so ridiculous that I couldn't help but laugh. At the same time, I felt disappointed and miserable, realizing he had never been this desperate about anything related to me. The more we talked, the colder my feelings for Ben became. I realized that talking to him anymore was pointless. No more dealing with this rotten man could possibly lead to my happiness. I felt foolish for suffering and hoping during my illness that he might come and speak kindly to me one day. Oblivious to my feelings, Ben continued to plead. Please, I'm begging you. Help me. But I couldn't bear to hear his words any longer. Please leave now, I said. Ben started to plead with a look of desperation. Even that was noisy and unpleasant to me. I pressed the nurse call button, explained the situation, and asked the nurse to get rid of Ben. A security guard came and forcibly removed him from the room. Please listen to me. I need you, he shouted until the moment he was thrown out. But I no longer accepted any of his words. Afterwards, he visited the hospital many times, but the nurses, knowing the situation, never let him near my room again. According to a friend, Ben, unable to get the $10 million, disappointed his mistress and was promptly divorced. Now left alone, as for me, I continued to confront my cancer with determination and finally recovered and was discharged. The relief of overcoming my difficult battle with cancer and the newfound energy I felt were more precious than anything. Now I'm living a peaceful and relaxed life, gradually using the assets I grew through investments. Receiving an allowance without having to tackle any household chores is a pleasant perk. However, the routine sarcasm from my mother-in-law, Julia, at 32, and working as a web designer often dampens the experience. Sharing a home with my husband, Ethan, and my mother-in-law has its challenges, especially considering our differing perspectives on work and domestic responsibilities. Originally part of a corporate environment, I transitioned into freelancing after marriage, a change welcomed by both my employer and me. The familiarity with my previous company ensures a steady stream of projects, sparing me the hassles of commuting and allowing a more concentrated effort on household tasks. Despite the satisfaction on both ends, my traditional mother-in-law doesn't share the enthusiasm. She harbors a belief in the conventional role of a wife as a homemaker, a viewpoint she expresses regularly. Despite my husband's attempts to reason with her, asserting that contemporary couples support each other, my mother-in-law remains resistant. According to her, my freelance work is merely a side job that doesn't contribute significantly to the household finances. Balancing my web design work with household chores during my free time hasn't impressed my mother-in-law. Her dissatisfaction stems from the stark contrast between my non-traditional approach and her expectations of a more conventional housewife. In her eyes, I may be perceived as the outsider who, in her mind, stole her only son. Since my husband's father passed away 5 years ago, my mother-in-law has become increasingly dependent on him. While this seems to slightly bother my husband, there's a subtle satisfaction in his acknowledgement of her reliance. Our current residence, acquired by my late father-in-law 30 years ago, now solely belongs to my mother-in-law. The mortgage was settled through life insurance, and the house layout conveniently accommodates our small family, providing me with a suitable workspace. Despite the occasional tension, our home becomes a gathering place for my mother-in-law's friends, who have been part of the neighborhood for over 3 decades. When her friends come over, the dynamics in the house take on a different tone. Taking a break from my work, I play the role of a gracious hostess to my mother-in-law's friends, offering them coffee and sweets. Yet every gathering of similarly aged women inevitably transforms into a session of complaints about their daughters-in-law. In the midst of such discussions, I can't help but chuckle as they detail their grievances. My daughter-in-law, they say, frequently returns to her parents' house over trivial matters, spending half the year away from us. According to them, she is financially irresponsible, causing even our son to be at a loss about how to handle her financial habits. Debt collectors have even paid us visits, they lament. The conversations in my workspace often take a humorous turn, with my mother-in-law's friends seemingly competing over who has the most challenging daughter-in-law. Rarely do they praise their daughters-in-law. If, by chance, one of them offers a compliment, "Your family's daughter-in-law is wonderful. She manages the household while working," my mother-in-law responds with a disgruntled expression, dismissing my work as nothing more than a side job. Amidst the laughter and gossip, my mother-in-law loudly questions the worth of my job, wondering aloud how much I actually earn. The discussion shifts to the spending habits of daughters-in-law, contrasting their personal expenses with the notion that the husband's earnings are meant for the family. The room erupts in laughter at this notion, reminiscing about the unthinkable nature of such discussions in their younger days. Unable to endure the repetitive tales of the past, I drown out the noise with headphones, focusing on my work. The modern-day daughter-in-law, myself included, often becomes the target of belittlement, making it unbearable to listen. One day, during a family dinner, my husband suggested buying a new car. My mother-in-law, quick to react, questioned why he needed his wife's consent for such decisions. Despite my husband's attempt to explain that it's a family decision, my mother-in-law insisted that he, the one with a driver's license, should choose any car he likes. Caught in the middle, my husband sought my help, and I diplomatically deferred the decision to him. The incident highlighted the ongoing dynamic where my husband always consults both me and my mother-in-law before making significant decisions, a practice my mother-in-law staunchly defended. While not inherently self-centered, my father-in-law had a penchant for making independent decisions, a trait my mother-in-law often lamented. My husband, raised by such parents, developed a belief in avoiding selfishness. On the contrary, my mother-in-law, influenced by the patriarchal behavior of my father-in-law, adhered to the notion that it was the norm. My mother-in-law's irritation towards my husband when he seeks my opinion circles back to me, with accusations that I am always too strict. I found myself at a loss for words in response to her criticism, as it's true that I tend to voice my concerns rather than making decisions independently. To my surprise, my husband, aligning with his mother, blamed me for his inclination to check with me before acting. Months into our marriage, I realized that my husband never defended me in front of his mother, even when it was just the two of us. His apologies and claims of prioritizing me seemed less convincing over time. The recent incident of choosing a new car cast a shadow on our relationship. Initially considerate, my husband ultimately failed to support me in front of his mother. Concerns about our future together began to surface, and I pondered alternatives to the current dynamics. I wished my husband would not mistake indecisiveness for kindness, and I longed for my mother-in-law to express her thoughts more directly. A month later, my husband's new car arrived, and the enthusiasm was palpable. The joyous invitation for a drive and the admiration from my mother-in-law turned sour when the cost was revealed: $660,000. Shocked by the extravagant choice, I confronted my husband about the financial implications, only to receive nonchalant responses and an offer to use a loan. My mother-in-law, quick to defend my husband, criticized my complaints about the expenditure, stating that I had given him the freedom to decide. Frustrated, I questioned the feasibility of affording such a luxury, only to be met with my mother-in-law's sharp retort: "It's not like you're paying, so you have no right to complain." Feeling unheard and dismissed, I argued that I contribute to the family income through my work. However, my mother-in-law, with an unusual harshness, questioned the legitimacy of my earnings, asserting that my little side job couldn't possibly match my husband's substantial income of over $100,000 a year. She regarded me with contempt, and just as I was about to assert that my earnings supported us, I noticed my husband had disappeared. Tolerating this treatment for too long, I reached my limit. My mother-in-law's declaration, "A daughter-in-law like you should just get out," echoed in my ears. It wasn't only her putting up with things, and discussing my salary seemed trivial now. Angry at her words and disappointed by my husband's indifference, I felt he was to blame for our dispute, given his usual indecisiveness. Fed up, I declared, "Understood then. I will leave," and headed to my workspace to pack up my computer and essentials. As I left the house, I informed my mother-in-law that I would return for the rest of my belongings later. Her angry gaze followed me, while my husband remained unseen in his room. As my mother-in-law screamed, "When you step into this house again, it will be after signing the divorce papers," I left without responding. Her abusive words, a first-time experience, bewildered me, but I chose not to engage further. Leaving my husband's house, I sought refuge at my parents' home. Surprised, my mother inquired about what had happened. Unable to specify, I lamented my lack of judgment and how my husband, who once cherished me deeply, had changed. Sharing the interactions with my husband's family with my parents brought some relief. With no children in the picture, my mother advised me to consider divorce sooner rather than later, given my financial independence. Over the weekend, with my father's help, I moved my belongings out of my husband's family home. My husband and mother-in-law remained elusive. Standing in front of my husband's room, I quietly spoke, "You took care of me for a long time. Can you sign the divorce papers?" Slipping the documents under the door, I heard his indifferent voice, "I've signed it. We're done here," as the divorce papers were returned to me. Ending my marriage without a word to my mother-in-law left me with a lingering sense of sadness. After 2 years in a house filled with few happy memories, I decided to quietly leave and head to the city office to submit the divorce papers. If a piece of paper could resolve everything, then all the better. The plan was to stay at my parents' house for the time being and continue my work there as I prepared to embark on a new life alone. As I geared up for this solo journey, my mother suggested I stay with them for a while, stating it would be less worrying than living alone. My father, too, voiced his concerns, warning that Ethan and his mother could unpredictably show up at my place. Although I initially considered such scenarios unlikely, life at my parents' home proved comforting. Thankfully, my job flexibility allowed me to work from anywhere, so I decided to extend my stay at my parents' house for a while. 2 months passed, and just as my ex-husband and mother-in-law were fading into distant memories, an unknown number flashed on my phone. Initially hesitant, I thought it might be a mistake, but after repeated calls, I answered only to find my ex-husband's frantic voice on the other end. "Why don't you answer the phone?" he asked, sounding confused, ready to end the call. I responded that since there was no need for us to interact anymore, I would hang up. His next question caught me off guard. Wait a minute, why isn't my smartphone working? Without much interest, I suggested he contact the mobile phone company. However, a sudden realization struck me, and I inquired if he had been depositing money into the bank account. I used to deposit my salary, along with his, into our joint account, but it was always short due to the performance-based nature of his health product sales job. Normally, I would deposit money at the end of the month, but for the past 3 months, only his salary had been deposited. As the pieces fell into place, I left in the middle of the month, and the new car's loan payments might have kicked in. My ex-husband remained silent. I've been managing the household with my income up to now. From now on, please manage your own living expenses, I calmly asserted over the phone. Inwardly, I felt the urge to say, you reap what you sow, but I chose to refrain and quietly ended the call. It occurred to me that my ex-husband had never disclosed his true income to his mother. It seemed she was unaware that our post-marriage livelihood was predominantly based on my salary. Perhaps my ex-husband was too ashamed to admit that his wife earned more than he did. Despite the general knowledge that basic utilities like electricity and water aren't easily cut off, it became evident that mobile phone service could be the first to go. One holiday morning, the house intercom insisted, signaling trouble. My father sternly informed someone at the front door, "We don't want to be involved with you anymore. Please leave." Sensing something serious, I rushed to the entrance with my mother. My former mother-in-law's voice sounded from the intercom, requesting a moment to talk. Tensing up, I faced her, and just as my father predicted, she had come to our home. Anger filled her face as she exclaimed upon seeing me. She blamed me for not making the monthly deposit, resulting in the electricity and water being cut off. We were all stunned by this revelation, unsure of what she meant. My ex-husband, attempting to intervene, declared, "Mom, stop it. Julia is no longer involved with us." However, his mother brushed off his hand, continuing her rage. "Ethan earns $5,000. How can this happen?" I corrected her quietly, revealing that the $5,000 was actually my income. Shocked by my declaration, she turned to my ex-husband. He admitted, almost inaudibly, that his take-home pay was about $500. My former mother-in-law stared at me in astonishment, and I clarified that my income was not just from an allowance but a regular job. She then asked about Ethan's take-home pay, and he responded, "About $500. After a moment of silence, she made an unbelievable proposition. "Julia, how about coming back? It was a joke to ask you to leave." Firmly refusing, I stated that we were already divorced, and it was no longer my concern. Despite my refusal, she persisted, suggesting that everything could be resolved if I got back with Ethan. My father, in a forceful tone, demanded they leave and warned of involving the police if they didn't. They left hurriedly, stumbling away as my father warned them not to step foot in our home again. Reflecting on their unreasonable behavior, my mother was furious, but my father seemed even more indignant. I was relieved that we had cut ties with such people. As time passed, through a friend of my ex-husband's, I learned about his subsequent situation. He had to give up his parents' house, including the land, and moved into a small apartment with his mother. The rarely used new car was sold, settling the remaining loan with the money from the house and land sale. Despite the loan being paid off, my ex-husband squandered money on gambling, and his whereabouts became unknown. My former mother-in-law was diagnosed with dementia and now resides in a nursing home. Meanwhile, I am doing well in my job and currently live alone. Recently, I started dating a man I met through work. He understands that I was previously married, and he is committed to his job, not relying on his spouse's income or indulging in extravagant purchases like my ex-husband did. While we haven't discussed marriage explicitly, I feel that we have a serious future together.